March 9, 1980. Ambato, Ecuador. A flash flood tears through the northern outskirts of the city, uprooting trees and exposing what lies beneath the Andean soil. As the muddy waters recede, a local merchant named Carvajal Poveda walks along the riverbank, surveying the damage to his property. That's when he sees the hand, small, delicate, reaching up from the earth like a final plea for help. Within hours, Ecuadorian authorities stand over not one grave, but 4, then 7, then a dozen. The bodies are all girls, none older than 12, each one positioned carefully, almost tenderly, in shallow graves that snake along the riverbank like a grotesque rosary. By nightfall, they've uncovered 53 victims. The investigators believe they've found a dumping ground, the work of multiple killers operating over years. But the truth was far more terrifying. They were standing in the hunting ground of one man, a man who would confess to the most prolific serial murder spree in documented history. A man who had been perfecting his technique for nearly a decade, moving like a ghost across 3 countries, leaving behind a trail of over 300 dead children. This is the story of Pedro Alonso López, the monster of the Andes. Before we uncover the truth about the monster of the Andes, Pedro López and 300 victims across South America spanning the 1970s across Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador. Make sure to subscribe to the Fear Abbey and ring that notification bell. We're approaching 500,000 subscribers, and we couldn't do this without you. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from our community of mystery seekers around the world. Now, let's descend into one of history's darkest chapters. To understand how Pedro López became invisible, you must first understand the South America of the 1970s, a continent drowning in chaos. Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador existed in a perfect storm of instability. Military juntas seized power in Ecuador in 1972. Peru's left-wing military government under Juan Velasco Alvarado was restructuring society through land reforms that displaced thousands. Colombia teetered on the edge of civil conflict, with guerrilla movements like M19 and FARC emerging in the countryside, while drug cartels began their ruthless consolidation of power in the cities. This wasn't just political turmoil, it was societal dissolution. Tens of thousands of peasant families fled rural violence, flooding into cities like Bogotá, Lima, and Quito. Shanty towns exploded on city outskirts, sprawling labyrinths of corrugated metal and desperation called tugurios in Colombia, pueblos jóvenes in Peru. Official records couldn't keep pace. Births went unregistered. Deaths went unnoticed. Children, especially girls, became expendable. In these communities, a missing child rarely warranted a police report. Families assumed their daughters had run away, been taken by distant relatives, or simply wandered off. Indigenous families faced particular indifference from predominantly mestizo police forces who dismissed their concerns with bureaucratic shrugs. Into this landscape of invisible children walked Pedro Alonso López. Born in 1948 in Tolima, Colombia, López entered the world as the 7th of 13 children born to a prostitute named Benilda López de Castaneda. His childhood reads like a blueprint for monstrosity. His mother, by his own account, threw him into the street at age 8 after catching him touching his younger sister sexually. The streets of Bogotá's historic center became his home. What happened next would shape everything that followed. An American man found the boy begging near the Plaza de Bolivar. He offered food, shelter, and protection. Within hours of entering the man's apartment, López was raped repeatedly. He was 8 years old. A charity took him in briefly, placing him in a school for orphan boys. But López fled after a male teacher molested him. He was 12. By 18, he'd been R.A., stead for car theft and sent to prison, where, he later claimed, he was gang-raped by 4 inmates. López murdered 3 of them in retaliation, strangling them in their sleep. Prison authorities simply added 2 years to his sentence for disciplinary problems. When López walked out of prison in 1969, he was 21 years old. He'd been raped and abused by men his entire life. Now he would make girls pay for it. The killing begins in Peru, 1969. A pattern emerges in the pueblos jóvenes surrounding Lima. Girls between 8 and 12 vanish from markets, street corners, and the edges of slum communities. The disappearances cluster around the northern districts, Comas, Independencia, San Martín de Porres, places where poverty renders people invisible. López later described his technique with chilling precision. He would watch for hours, identifying girls who appeared to be alone, unsupervised, or from families too disorganized to immediately notice their absence. He preferred indigenous girls with long dark hair. He approached them gently, offering candy, toys, or the promise of work. He told them he was looking for his own lost daughter. Could they help him search? The girls followed him to isolated areas just beyond the shantytown perimeters, abandoned construction sites, dried riverbeds, patches of scrubland. What happened next, Lopez insisted in later interviews, wasn't violent. He would talk to the girls, sometimes for an hour or more. He would tell them they were pretty. He would stroke their hair. Then he would rape them. Then, at the moment of climax, he would strangle them with his hands, watching their eyes as the life drained away. "I liked to watch them die," he told investigators. "I would get very excited. I found it very stimulating." He buried them in shallow graves, arranging their bodies carefully. Sometimes he returned to the graves to be near them, to talk to them, to lie beside them. By 1970, Lopez claims to have killed over 100 girls in Peru. Not one case was connected. Not one investigation crossed jurisdictional lines to identify a pattern. Then something changed. In 1972, Lopez attempted to abduct a 9-year-old girl from a market in Ayacucho, a city in Peru's south-central highlands. But this time, the girl's indigenous Quechua community witnessed the attempt. They dragged Lopez into the plaza and prepared to execute him, burying him alive, a traditional punishment for child predators. A local missionary intervened, convincing the community to hand Lopez over to police instead. Incredibly, authorities released him, deported him across the border into Ecuador, without charges, without fingerprints, without any record that would track him. They simply wanted the problem to go away. Lopez disappeared into Ecuador's coastal regions. The year is now 1973. The killing resumes. In Guayaquil, Ecuador's largest coastal city, another wave of disappearances begins. Girls vanish from the sprawling slums of Suburbio and Guasmo. But Lopez is refining his methodology. He moves constantly now, never staying in one area long enough to establish a pattern. He works his way inland, toward the Andean highlands. In Quito, the capital city nestled in a volcanic valley at 9,350 feet, Lopez finds his ideal hunting ground. The city is experiencing explosive growth. Rural families pour in from the countryside, displaced by land reforms and violence. The southern neighborhoods, Chilagalo, Quitumbe, La Magdalena, become a maze of unregulated settlements where hundreds of unregistered children live in plain sight. Lopez claims he killed 3 girls per week during his peak periods. That's 12 per month, 144 per year. And still no one noticed. Individual families reported their daughters missing. Police took statements. But the reports gathered dust in separate precincts, separate cities, separate countries. No central database existed. No computer system could cross-reference patterns. The very poverty that made these girls vulnerable also made them invisible to the bureaucratic systems that might have protected them. By 1978, Lopez had expanded his territory into Colombia's southern departments. He worked the cities along the Pan-American Highway, Pasto, Popayan, Cali. Each location offered the same advantages: chaotic urban growth, indigenous and mixed-race populations marginalized by authorities, and law enforcement too overwhelmed or indifferent to investigate missing poor children. But something was shifting in Ecuador. Carvajal Poveda wasn't the only person finding graves. If this story is giving you chills, hit that like button. It helps us bring more forgotten and suppressed histories to light. Share this with someone who loves dark mysteries and true crime. The case only gets more disturbing from here. Let's discover what happens next. The flood changes everything. March 9, 1980. The Ambato River swells beyond its banks after days of heavy rain in the highlands. When the waters recede, they've rewritten the landscape of Ambato's northern outskirts, a semi-rural area where the city bleeds into agricultural land. Carvajal Poveda's discovery of the first body triggers an immediate police response. But what starts as a single homicide investigation transforms into something unprecedented within hours. Detective Gilberto Hidalgo arrives at the scene expecting a single grave, perhaps a domestic crime or isolated murder. What he finds instead is a necropolis. The graves follow the natural contour of the riverbank, positioned where the soil was softer and easier to dig. Some are barely 18 inches deep. The flood has exposed them in sequential order, like pages torn from a book and scattered downstream. Hidalgo immediately recognizes the pattern. The victims are all pre-adolescent girls, all positioned on their backs, all showing evidence of sexual assault, all strangled, the hyoid bone crushed in each case, indicating manual strangulation from someone facing the victim. By midnight, the count reaches 53 confirmed graves. Forensic examination reveals the bodies are in varying states of decomposition, indicating the graves were created over an extended period, possibly 18 months to 2 years. Some victims still wear fragments of clothing, a shoe, a hair ribbon, a school uniform skirt. These small artifacts allow investigators to begin the heartbreaking process of identification. But 53 bodies in one location raises an immediate question. Are they dealing with a dumping ground used by multiple killers or a single perpetrator? Dr. Hugo Zambrano, Ecuador's most experienced forensic pathologist, arrives from Quito to oversee the autopsies. Working in a makeshift morgue established in a local gymnasium, his team makes several critical observations. The killing method is identical across all victims: manual strangulation, performed face-to-face, with the killer's thumbs crushing the throat while fingers grip the back of the neck. The sexual assault pattern is consistent: vaginal rape, but no evidence of sadistic torture or mutilation beyond the strangulation itself. The burial method never varies: shallow graves, victims positioned on their backs, sometimes with personal items placed beside them. This is one killer, one man, operating with mechanical consistency. Within 48 hours, the investigation expands beyond Ambato. Hidalgo begins contacting police departments in surrounding provinces, asking about unsolved disappearances of young girls. The responses are overwhelming. Chimborazo province reports 23 missing girls matching the victim profile. Tungurahua adds 18% more. Cotopaxi 17. The numbers become incomprehensible. Then, on March 12th, a break emerges from an unexpected source. A woman named Carlina Ramon Poveda walks into the police station in Ambato with her 12-year-old daughter, Maria. 3 days earlier, Maria tells investigators a man approached her outside a market in the northern district. He was short, maybe 5'7", stocky, with dark hair and indigenous features. He told her he was looking for his daughter who had run away. Would she help him search? He'd pay her. Maria's mother had taught her to be wary. She refused. The man persisted, becoming agitated. When Maria screamed, the man fled into the crowd. Carlina brought her daughter to the police after reading newspaper reports about the graves. The physical description Maria provides matches descriptions from 3 other attempted abductions reported in the weeks prior, incidents police had dismissed as isolated. Investigators now have a suspect description. They also have a crucial detail: the man was still actively hunting. On March 13th, police established surveillance at markets and schools throughout Ambato's poorer districts. They're looking for a short, stocky man of indigenous appearance, likely in his 20s or 30s, who loiters near groups of unsupervised children. The wait doesn't last long. March 14th, early afternoon. An officer spots a man matching the description attempting to lure a 9-year-old girl away from a market in the Ficoa district. The officer approaches. The man sees the uniform and runs. The chase winds through narrow streets before the suspect is cornered in a dead-end alley. He surrenders without struggle. At the police station, the man identifies himself as Pedro Alonso López, age 31. No fixed address. He carries no identification. His clothes are dirty but not ragged. He has money in his pockets, suggesting regular income, though he claims to be unemployed. For the first 6 hours of interrogation, Lopez offers nothing. He denies any knowledge of the graves. He claims he was at the market looking for work, that the officer mistook his intentions with the girl. Then Pastor Cordova Gudino enters the interrogation room. Gudino is a local priest who occasionally assists police with suspect interviews, particularly when dealing with indigenous or rural populations who distrust secular authority. He doesn't threaten Lopez, he doesn't cajole. He simply tells him that God sees everything, that confession is the only path to peace. Something in Lopez breaks. At 9:47 p.m. on March 14, 1980, Pedro López begins confessing to the murder of young girls. He talks through the night. And as dawn breaks over the Andes, investigators realize they're listening to the most prolific serial killer in recorded history. The confession unfolds over 3 days. Lopez doesn't simply admit to the 53 bodies found in Ambato. He describes killing across 3 countries over more than a decade. He provides specific locations. He draws maps. He leads police to grave sites scattered across Ecuador's highland provinces. By March 17th, investigators have confirmed an additional 57 graves based on Lopez's directions. The bodies match his descriptions perfectly. Young girls manually strangled, buried in shallow graves near riverbeds, or in isolated scrubland just beyond city limits. But it's Lopez's numerical claims that stun investigators. He states he killed approximately 110 girls in Colombia, primarily in the southern departments between 1970 and 1980. He estimates 100 victims in Peru between 1969 and 1972. In Ecuador, where he operated from 1973 to 1980, he claims at least 140, maybe more. The total, over 300 victims. Investigators are skeptical. Serial killers often inflate their body counts seeking infamy, but as Lopez provides specific details about victim locations, police across Ecuador begin recovering bodies that match his testimony with disturbing accuracy. The question becomes, can these claims be verified? Detective Hidalgo coordinates with Interpol to contact Colombian and Peruvian authorities. The response reveals a critical failure in international law enforcement cooperation. Peru has scattered reports of missing girls in the northern Pueblos Chauvins during the early 1970s. No centralized investigation. Colombia's police, overwhelmed by guerrilla violence and drug-related homicides, essentially ignored missing children from poor communities entirely. No physical evidence from Peru or Colombia can be recovered or verified. Too much time has passed. Graves have been disturbed by development, flooding, or scavengers. Without bodies, without DNA technology, without comprehensive missing persons databases, the international victims remain statistical ghosts. But in Ecuador, the evidence is irrefutable. By April 1980, investigators have confirmed 110 victims directly attributable to Lopez. The forensic consistency is overwhelming. Every victim matches his preferred profile, girls aged 8 to 12, predominantly indigenous or mixed race, from impoverished communities. Every body shows identical trauma patterns. Dr. Zambrano's forensic report becomes a cornerstone of the prosecution. He testifies that the probability of 110 murders exhibiting such precise methodological consistency without being committed by the same individual is statistically impossible. Yet even as evidence mounts, Ecuador faces a profound legal dilemma. Ecuador abolished the death penalty in 1906. The maximum sentence for any crime is 16 years. Even for 110 confirmed murders, Pedro López cannot legally be sentenced to more than 16 years in prison. The trial begins in July 1980 in Ambato's provincial court. López pleads guilty to all charges. He shows no remorse. When asked why he killed, he offers chilling testimony. "I lost my innocence at age 8, so I decided to do the same to as many young girls as I could. I am the man of the century. No one will ever forget me." Psychiatrists evaluate López to determine criminal responsibility. Dr. Hernan Garcia Arcos conducts the primary assessment. His report, submitted to the court in August 1980, concludes that López suffers from severe antisocial personality disorder, but is legally sane. He understood his actions were wrong and took elaborate precautions to avoid detection. The psychiatric evaluation reveals additional disturbing details. López expresses no emotional connection to his victims beyond sexual gratification. He refers to them as "my little friends" and describes the murders with the detachment of someone discussing a hobby. He admits to keeping a written tally of victims but claims he destroyed it before his arrest. On August 28, 1980, the court delivers its verdict, guilty on 110 counts of murder. The sentence, 16 years in Ecuador's Garcia Moreno prison in Quito. The families of victims erupt in outrage. How can the worst mass murderer in history receive only 16 years? Protests fill Ambato's streets. The government offers no satisfactory answer beyond pointing to existing law. López enters Garcia Moreno in September 1980. Prison officials immediately recognize a problem. His presence among the general population creates a target on his back. Child killers are despised even among violent criminals. Within the first week, inmates attempt to murder López twice. He's placed in isolation, a small cell in the prison's high-security wing, where he spends 23 hours per day alone. But isolation offers unexpected benefits for López. He receives privileges denied other inmates, books, art supplies, extended visiting hours with missionaries and psychiatrists. He becomes a subject of intense psychological study. Researchers from as far as the United States request interviews, hoping to understand the mind of a serial killer operating on an unprecedented scale. López manipulates every interaction. He offers false insights, contradictory statements, and theatrical displays of pseudo-remorse. He tells one psychiatrist he's found God. He tells another he would kill again if released. He's playing a game, and he knows it. The years pass. 1984, López applies for early release based on good behavior. Denied. 1988, international media discovers the case. The monster of the Andes appears in newspapers worldwide. Ecuador's government faces international pressure to never release him. 1994, Ecuador's laws change, allowing for extended sentences in exceptional cases. Prosecutors attempt to retroactively extend López's sentence. The courts rule the change cannot be applied retroactively. That would violate constitutional protections against ex post facto laws. 1998, after serving 14 years of his 16-year sentence, with credit for time served during trial, Pedro Alonso López is released from Garcia Moreno prison. The date is February 28, 1998. But Ecuador's government, aware of the public outrage that would follow an unconditional release, immediately transfers Lopez to Colombian custody. Colombia has an outstanding warrant for a 1979 murder in Tolima, a case unrelated to the serial killings. Lopez is deported to Colombia in chains. He enters Colombia's psychiatric prison system, declared criminally insane by Colombian psychiatrists using different diagnostic criteria than Ecuador employed. He's committed to the Hospital Psiquiátrico San Isidro in Bogotá indefinitely. Then, in 2002, something inexplicable happens. A Colombian court reviews Lopez's psychiatric commitment. His lawyers argue that after decades of incarceration and psychiatric treatment, he no longer poses a danger. The court agrees. On a technicality related to the length of his psychiatric hold without formal criminal conviction in Colombia, they order his release. Pedro Alonso López walks out of San Isidro Hospital on June 14, 2002. He's given a new identity, a small pension, and instructions to report monthly to a parole officer. He reports once. Then he vanishes. The case of Pedro López forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about how societies protect, or fail to protect, their most vulnerable members. The first truth, invisibility enables predation. Lopez operated successfully for over a decade not because he was a criminal mastermind, but because his victims were systematically invisible to the structures meant to protect them. They were poor, they were indigenous, they were female. They existed in communities where police presence was minimal and official documentation was nearly non-existent. When Lopez confessed, investigators attempted to verify victim identities. Of the 110 confirmed Ecuadorian victims, only 37 could be definitively identified through family reports or forensic evidence. The remaining 73 remain nameless, their families either unable or too afraid to come forward, or their disappearances never reported at all. This pattern of invisibility isn't unique to 1970s South America. In Canada, thousands of indigenous women and girls have disappeared or been murdered over decades. Their cases ignored by authorities until public pressure forced governmental inquiries in the 2010s. In the United States, the crisis of missing and murdered indigenous women follows identical patterns: marginalized populations, indifferent law enforcement, systemic invisibility. The second truth, cross-border crime requires cross-border cooperation that didn't exist, and often still doesn't exist. Lopez moved freely between Peru, Ecuador, and Colombia without triggering any alarm. No international database tracked his movements. His deportation from Peru to Ecuador came without fingerprints, without photographs, without any mechanism to alert Ecuadorian police that a suspected child predator had just entered their territory. Interpol existed in the 1970s, but its effectiveness depended on member nations submitting data and actively cooperating. In practice, most developing nations lacked the infrastructure to participate meaningfully. Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador were fighting their own internal battles, guerrilla movements, political instability, economic collapse, and had neither resources nor political will to prioritize international criminal databases. It wasn't until the 1990s that meaningful international cooperation on serial crime began developing. The International Criminal Police Organization's Violent Crime Linkage Analysis System (VICLAS) was launched in 1995, decades too late for Lopez's victims. The third truth, the legal system struggled, and still struggles, to handle unprecedented evil. Ecuador's 16-year maximum sentence reflected a penal philosophy designed around rehabilitation and proportionality. But what happens when the crime is so massive that traditional sentencing frameworks become absurd? 110 confirmed murders, 16 years, less than 2 months per victim. This legal paradox has played out repeatedly across different systems. Anders Breivik, who killed 77 people in Norway's 2011 attacks, received Norway's maximum sentence of 21 years because that's the legal maximum. Norway can extend the sentence indefinitely in 5-year increments if he's deemed dangerous, but the initial sentence reflects the same philosophical problem Ecuador faced. The question becomes, should societies maintain maximum sentences that can be overwhelmed by extreme cases, or should they create exceptions that might undermine broader principles of proportional justice? The fourth truth, we still don't know where Pedro López is, or whether he's alive. After his 2002 release in Colombia, Lopez disappeared. Some reports claim Colombian authorities rearrested him in 2019 on new murder charges, but these reports remain unverified. The Colombian government neither confirms nor denies his custody. The most likely scenarios: he was murdered shortly after release by someone who recognized him, a common fate for released child killers. He remains alive under a new identity, somewhere in Colombia or beyond, either living quietly or potentially active again. He died of natural causes, unidentified, in the nearly 2 decades since his release. The uncertainty itself is troubling. A man who credibly claims to have killed over 300 children simply vanishes into administrative obscurity. The fifth truth: Lopez's case catalyzed changes, but those changes came too late and remain incomplete. Ecuador reformed its criminal sentencing laws in 1994, allowing for extended sentences in exceptional cases, a direct response to the Lopez case. Colombia and Peru enhanced cooperation on cross-border crime tracking. International protocols for handling serial predators improved, but these changes didn't prevent similar cases from emerging. Luis Alfredo Garavito, La Bestia, murdered at least 138 children in Colombia during the 1990s, operating almost identically to Lopez, targeting poor and street children. Garavito was caught in 1999, convicted on 172 counts of murder, but sentenced to only 30 years under Colombian law, later increased to 40 years, then potentially reduced to 22 for cooperation. Daniel Camargo Barbosa, another Colombian serial killer, murdered at least 72 young girls in Colombia and Ecuador during the 1970s and 1980s, operating in the same regions as Lopez. The pattern repeats because the underlying conditions remain: vulnerable populations, overwhelmed law enforcement, systemic indifference. What the monster of the Andes reveals about human nature isn't just the capacity for individual evil. It's our collective willingness to look away when the victims don't look like us, don't speak our language, don't have the social power to demand justice. Every one of Lopez's victims was someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone whose absence tore through a family's life. But to the broader society, to the legal systems, to the police departments that took missing persons reports and filed them away, these girls were disposable. That's the real horror. Not that one man could kill 300 times, but that he could do so in plain sight for over a decade across 3 countries, because the societies he moved through had already decided his victims didn't matter enough to notice. What are you thin? K drove Pedro López to commit such incomprehensible evil. Was it the trauma of his childhood, or was there something fundamentally broken in him from the beginning? And how does a society allow someone to kill over 300 times before anyone notices? Leave your theories in the comments below. We read every single one. If you found this investigation valuable, subscribe to the Fear Abbey for more lost chapters of history they tried to bury. We're committed to telling the stories of forgotten victims and examining the systems that failed them. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. And if you think someone you know would find this case as disturbing and important as you did, share this video with them. Until next time, remember, the most terrifying monsters aren't hiding in the dark. They're walking among us, hunting in plain sight, relying on our willingness to look away. See you in the next investigation.